Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Catch-22 is a Hulu show made by Grant Heslov and George Clooney, and a whole bunch of other people. And it's all about the pointlessness of war and the bureaucratic madness of the military. Episode 3 starts with Yoyo swimming and pondering and trying to find a way out of this most likely suicidal Bologna bombing raid that Cathcart called for last week. And he pops in to see Milo, and Milo's all happy because the tomato soup that the kitchen's been rustling up's really nice, and he tries to convince Milo to spike it with laundry detergent, and he kind of sort of agrees, in return for a favour. And Yoyo tells the team not to touch any of the soup, and over dinner they discuss Clevenger's disappearance last week, and Orth thinks that maybe he flew away to Switzerland and he's all happy now. And he asks Yossarian if he'd fly there, but Yoyo, ever being the downer, points out that Sweden would be a much better bet to fly to since it's friendly, not neutral. And he has this grand plan to go and live there in a sort of hippie commune with a whole bunch of wives and have loads of kids. And then he goes and pesters Major about the book and how far he's learned, and he gets really awkward because the Major hasn't actually read it, and the Colonels are only a few seats away and they can overhear. And still, Operation Brownout seems to go quite well because everyone has sore tummies and starts pooing like crazy, and it seems that everyone's happy in the squadron apart from MacLeod, who points out that Yoyo's only actually delayed things and they're still going to have to bomb Bologna soon enough. And that gets confirmed by Milo. I mean, he comes back from Wales with an amphibious jeep that he's keeping for after the war. And then Yoyo's straight back onto Major, and he can't get in the door, so he goes in the window, and he tells him to stand down the crew, and if not the crew, then stand him down, and he's getting nowhere. So he goes to the map to look at it that night, and he has a total brainwave. He just moves the line on the map, so it suddenly appears they've actually already taken Bologna. And due to the nature of crazy bureaucracy and the madness, it actually works, and it'll just get passed up the chain, and the mission ends up getting cancelled. And then Major DeCoverley, he's so pleased that he gets in one of Milo's planes there, and he tries to requisition a nice building for the boys, for R&R and all that jazz, but only, oops. And meanwhile, the boys themselves are in Rome, innately struggling with the fact that Clara, his girl of choice in the brothel, says that, if he really loved her, then he'd let her take the night off. So he's cooked up this scheme where he's going to pay for the other girls to go out with Yossarian, because Arfie isn't into paying for women. In fact, it turns out he's a bit more about sort of blackmailing women to the sex by the sounds of things. Eesh. And Yoyo ends up caving and they pop outside, and it turns out that wee girl, he met last week is actually in fact Clara's wee sister. And since, the GIs are kind of soft touches, they convince him to take them all out for a gelato. And of course, the girls all skedaddle in a car full of colonels when they go past. Ah well, that's how it goes, boys. And later, back on Pianosa Island, the truth about the map alteration comes out, and Cathcart's totally spitting teeth. I mean, not only because he's a bit embarrassed, but also because Major DeCoverley's missing in action, because he's been clearly captured by the Nazis. And this point isn't lost on Yoyo, because this is the second person to actually suffer because of his actions. And, everybody ends up suffering then, because Cathcart raises the mission count by 10. Yikes. So they end up going on the Bologna raid, and Yoyo gets cold feet and he yanks out the intercom wires, and that convinces Kid Samson and MacLeod to abort the mission. And then they get back, MacLeod's a wee bit cross because, he's the pilot and he thinks that Yoyo should just accept that they're all going to die. Meanwhile, a bunch of German planes start, flying around the base. And it turns out that actually they're Milo's and they're owned by the Syndicate, and he's christened it M&M Enterprises. And it turns out that, the Germans are actually part of the Syndicate as well, which is kind of crazy but sort of makes sense in a Milo kind of way. And at chow time, Cathcart seems to be a bit happy for a change, and he mentions the loss of a dozen good men and he wants to reward the squadron, so Milo doles out a load of baked Alaska to absolutely everyone except Yoyo's squad. I mean, because it didn't go unnoticed that they aborted their run, and Cathcart shames MacLeod and then the rest of them publicly. So the guys relax in the sun as much as they can. So MacLeod then starts buzzing them in a wee plane, having a bit of fun, the daft wee laddie, and Kid Samson decides he's going to try and joust him, and MacLeod can't pull up in time, and Kid Samson dies. And then MacLeod flies up in the sky and cuts his engines and then glides straight into the side of a mountain, and the rest of the squadron can just stare in horror at what happened. So what did I think? Well, I thought this week was kind of a slow slide out of fun daftness, back in we've had before, into something a lot darker. I mean, not totally darker, because there was still the craziness of Milo's ever-growing enterprises turning from a wee mess tent scam into this big kind of multinational conglomerate thing. And he's branching out from fruit and meat swaps to different places to actual vehicles and personnel.
The Germans are contributing 3 cargo planes to the Syndicate.
And then there was like the whole poopy soup thing. I mean, that was kind of priceless. And it's kind of hard not to think about like the TV show American Vandal, which is on like Netflix, and it's kind of a really funny thing that takes like the Making a Murderer sort of documentary format and applies it to someone like spiking a school cafeteria with laxatives. And it's really funny to see the way that played out on Catch-22, as well as to see the fact that Major DeCoverley's antics wound him like walking right into the middle of a Nazi HQ and getting captured. I mean, all just because nobody bothered to radio and actually check that Yo-Yo moving that line was accurate. I mean, it's even more of like, as I said, the military madness of bureaucracy in action. And Yo-Yo this week, I mean, he's kind of spiraling in depression and antagonism because everything he does and says goes wrong. I mean, whether it's moving that line, spiking the soup, or even just like trying to get an ice cream with Nately's whore and her kid sister. No, really, I mean, honestly, that's what they're actually called in the book. The characters are called Nately's whore and Nately's whore's kid sister because it is kind of a strange book, but a lot of it's being written very much kind of offhandedly from the point of view of Yossarian. But anyway, as I said, amazing book. And sure, those things were kind of fun, but there was kind of a tinge of darkness to it all. I mean, wow. I mean, it's mostly been more or less fun and games up until this point in the show. I mean, sure, Private Mudd died the other week, but we never actually saw it, and we didn't really know who he was. But this week, I mean, Major DeCoverley got captured by Nazis, and then Kid Samson and Nick McWalt both died. And they've both been in pretty much every episode of the show so far, and almost every scene. I mean, even when they were not directly talking, they were in the background. And a lot of time this week seemed to be like about showing them interacting, presumably so that we actually really knew who they were by the point that they died. So, so they were clear in the audience's mind as distinct from the other characters. And I thought that was pretty well done. I think that got a sense of who they were, and McWatt, especially with that whole sort of happy, happy, dead speech, which I didn't actually catch during the first time I watched it, was what he actually says, kind of like a mantra, just as he flies into the mountain. He's actually saying happy, 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 dead. But I thought that scene was actually pretty powerful. And it's a bit of a change from the book, because in the book he's actually in a passenger plane with a bunch of other guys and they all like jump out with parachutes. And bizarrely, like Doc Danika's actually on the manifest as being in the plane because that allows him to get extra flight pay. And that leads to like a weird situation where once the plane crashes and because he didn't jump out, everyone just kind of agrees that Doc Danica must be dead. It's a bit strange, even though he's clearly alive. I mean, they might work that into the show later on. I don't know, but yeah, it's interesting because I mean, the way that they shot it as well, the closeness of it. I mean, it seemed almost less horrific to me. I mean, maybe because I could tell it was like clearly special effects, but like the way they shot it in the 1970 movie was actually more affecting. I mean, and that movie made it a bit less obvious it was going to happen. I mean, I felt like this was pretty heavily signposted as he's buzzing down in the close-ups, and then Kid Samson like doing the joust and stuff. Whereas in the 1970s one, the focus is really on people on the beach, and McWatt's actually buzzing Yossarian. He's doing it just to annoy Yossarian, and then Hungry Joe is actually trying to get a photo because they actually combine the characters of Hungry Joe and Kid Samson in that film. But I mean, wow! I mean, look at that! I mean, I love that shot. What's even better, you know how they do that shot? That's actually the actor holding like a big rectangle blue screen above his waist. It was on the DVD commentary. That's genius. But yeah, I mean, it's brutal. And although I really like this episode, there was a bit of a touch of the heavy-handed coming in, and that doesn't really suit that well with me. I mean, I find that a bit irritating at times. And this heavy-handedness kind of at play, and some of it felt like some of it might be necessary to get like ideas across. Like, because I mean, you can toss a line in the book like Milo made a deal with Germans for airplanes or whatever, but in the show, unless somebody narrates that, you have to kind of like play it out. And because it's a more realistic show rather than a completely crazy silly one, it comes across as a little bit clunky. I mean, still entertaining, but just a bit clunky. I mean, similarly, here's this other thing, and I mentioned this kind of last time, but because it's more apparent this week, I'm just going to up and say it. I'm not going to reveal any spoilers, but I kind of don't like the way that they're playing Arfie. I mean, nothing to do with like Revy Gavron, the actor who plays him, because I mean he's great. I mean he was awesome as the wee slimy corporate producer in A Star Is Born, and he was like Duro in Rome back when he was only a teenager. I mean, yikes, that was a while ago. But I mean, in this, he's not really featured all that heavily, other than like standing in the background or the odd line. I mean, and you only really recognise him half the time because he's got his pipe. I mean, Charles Grodin played him in the film, and there he was kind of sort of this kind of middle-aged, kind of pipe-smoking gentleman guy who literally goes around scolding and sending prostitutes away like a protective dad.
That's the kind of humor in the face of adversity that keeps America strong. I like you, Yossarian.
And there's a reason that they play him that way in the film. And in this, they've got him like straight up bragging about how he basically, him and his buddies coerced some girls into sleeping with the whole dorm back at college by threatening to tell like the girls' parents that they had slept with the whole dorm. I mean, I get that the way that he's saying that basically means that he blackmailed them with a Catch-22, and that ties into the idea of like the story. But So the writing wise that makes sense, but instantly like you're just like, wow, he's such a horrible person, and we just don't like that character, and we don't trust him now. And again, this is going to be more important later on, and I don't really want to get into exactly why because it'll play out in the show. But I feel like that was maybe a misstep in the writing. It's a bit too blunt, and the way that the film did it, I thought was perfect because it sets him up as one character, and then and then does some interesting things. But this feels just like a bit too heavy-handed. But anyway, I could be wrong here, as I've not seen how this show plays out yet. And on top of that, like the dourness of it all is getting pretty unrelenting. I mean, this is meant to be black comedy after all. I mean, it's a satire of war, and I totally love me a bit of a war satire. I mean, apart from like Catch-22 and MASH, and I love both MASH, the TV show, and the movie. I mean, there's other great ones like, I mean, Three Kings, that's a brilliant war satire, or Kelly's Heroes, I mean, which is one of the best films ever made. Or, even stuff like No Man's Land, which is grim, but it's still funny. Or even, even the amazing Blackadder Goes Forth, like the fourth season of Blackadder, the one that's about World War One. I mean, there's ways to do comedy and and about war, but not actually making it silly and actually make it mean something. But this week it was just trying to be grimmer than grim. And the satire elements don't feel like they quite fit as well as they have in the first couple of episodes. And again, it could be down to like some slightly blunt direction in writing. But anyway, I'm still enjoying this series massively, and I'm going to have the next episode up in about a week's time. So maybe I'll put some other content up in the meantime. But till next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.